Hi, this is Ryan Sullivan. I am the functional fitness trainer, and I am here with a message for you before we start this awesome training. One, it's a little slow in the beginning. So I just want to be really clear. Stick with me in the beginning. The first 10 or 15 minutes might feel like a lot of jargon, but what I'm trying to do is set up an understanding that is going to help carry you through the entire presentation. And number two, make sure that you have your full attention on this for the next 45 minutes or so. It's a lot to follow and it's a lot to take in, but it's really valuable information and it's going to really help you understand how your body works and a little bit about how these different systems interact and how they can be managed to help you out. And if you stick through all the way to the end, you're going to get some tips on how to better manage your chronic pain, different things that you can do to help yourself on a daily basis, and some lifestyle adjustments that may be helpful in the long run. So stay tuned, and you're gonna learn a lot in this. Hi, my name is Ryan Sullivan. Welcome to today's webinar, Getting Out of Pain and Get Moving, How to Manage Chronic Pain and Discomfort for a More Active and Healthier Lifestyle. What you're going to learn today: what is fascia? What are myofascial slings? Why are myofascial slings important? How do myofascial slings affect our posture, gait, and performance? How is chronic pain and fascia related? What is the cumulative injury cycle? How do you break the cumulative injury cycle? And what can we do to stay healthy and active lifelong? So a little bit about me. I have a sacralized L5 on my left side, which means that my sacrum and my L5 vertebrae have fused on one side, which ultimately leads to having a hypermobile SI joint on my right side, which ultimately led to the end of my powerlifting career. That was the end of that. I took a hard fall on my right and walking my dog, actually. And then that pretty much stopped me from being able to powerlift moving forward because it destabilized my right SI joint. I've had arthritis and stenosis in my lower back since my early to mid 20s. And I've been treated for that multiple times. Partially separated clavicle on my left side as an injury. I have a slap tear on my right side as an injury. I had a tibial shear on my left ankle very early in life, and I've probably re-injured that about 3 times. And I had pretty severe head and neck trauma in the early 2000s. I also have a left eye astigmatism, which doesn't sound like a big deal, but it actually does play a bigger role, as you'll understand later when we talk about the myofascial sling system. So, but despite all of this, I earned a 5th degree black belt in Bujinkan Ninjutsu. I was a competitive powerlifter for many years and a barbell lifter for many, many years. I've ran multiple 5 and 10K races and mud races. I've worked with hundreds to thousands of clients over my career lifetime. I became a certified personal trainer in 2012. First course in myofascial work and pain management was in 2014. Certified yoga instructor in 2016, then certified in the assessment and correction of neuromuscular imbalances through NEDA, also known as the Yanda method, in 2019, certified as a wellness coach in 2021, certified in multiple courses through Anatomy Trains in 2022, certified in biomechanics methods since 2022, certified flexibility specialist 2022, and also got a trauma-informed care certification in 2022. Because, all of this, as I've fallen further and further down this rabbit hole, I come up with questions and I seek out those answers. And that is why I continue to research and learn, and I will continue to research and learn for myself as well as my clients. But the key that I want to put forward here is that even though I have had all of this and I've been in chronic pain since my early 20s, because of a lot of these different issues, I have still managed to do all of these things because I have really tried to educate myself. My first 10 years as a mover, I was a martial arts instructor. And then for the decade after that, I've been a personal trainer. And I really, really am passionate about helping people that are in chronic pain manage their pain, getting out of pain, and living a more active lifestyle so that they can live longer, happier lives. So what is fascia and why does all of this stuff matter? So fascia is this very clear, strong, and crazy material that can be gel-like or very rigid. It all depends on its level of hydration. So fascia is basically the dark matter of the body. Dark matter holds the universe together. Fascia pretty much holds you together. It performs a myriad of functions. Fascia is quite literally everywhere. It's a fluid regulator and makes sure that fluid is dispersed evenly throughout the body. It's a shock absorber. It actually provides protection to the tissues and bones in the body. It's a sensory organ. Think of it as a giant spider web that is packed with 7 to 10 times more nerve endings in it than muscle. And often our proprioceptive senses are directly tied to our fascial system, as well as that soreness that you get from working out or activity. That is often fascia that's become inflamed. It provides stability to the body and the joints and the bones. It can be solid like a tendon or ligament. It can be gel-like when it's very well hydrated. It can be filled with calcium salts and it turns into a bone. What that means is if you dissolve the calcium salts out of a bone, you just wind up with a strip of fascia. It is ever present and functions as a scaffolding in the brain and in your neurons. So even your neural cells use fascia as a scaffolding. So it's all fascia when it comes right down to it. When you look at fascia, it is present at every layer of muscle, from the bundling the cells into fibers, and then fibers into bundles, and then bundles into muscle heads, and then muscle heads into muscular units, and then those units ultimately link together to make slings. So you can see in this image here, every one of these white layers is fascia that then wraps into another one and wraps into another one and wraps into another one. This is all fascia, this is all fascia, this is all fascia, this is all fascia, even down to these little itty bitty fibers. When fascia is healthy, it's organized in a lattice structure, which is what you see here, and provides flexibility and support to the entire body. They normally call this process tensegrity. When the fascia is unhealthy, it looks more like steel wool. The lattice structure is filled with these cross fibers and it results in this stiff, hard, dehydrated kind of mass with layers of tissue that stick to one another, and it can impede mobility, it can alter function, and it can cause inflammation from the altered function. We'll talk more about that in the cumulative injury cycle later. So at every layer, there is fascia present. So your superficial layer is just underneath the skin. And a lot of the time, these little structures that you see here are fascia that reaches up and grabs the skin and causes these little dimples. People normally call that cellulite. So if the fascia is bunched up in an area, that can actually cause cellulite, and breaking down the fascia can help relieve that, as well as other areas. You can actually notice in an area that has poor function, you can pull on the skin and see if the skin is loose or if it's too tight. If it's too tight, that's something that it tells you that the fascia is bound up in that area. Because normally, if it's just under the skin, it's supposed to be very flexible. This layer is packed with nerves and blood vessels and the lymph system and everything. It provides a degree of cushioning and buffering for protection. Then beneath that, you have a deeper layer. And that deeper layer is also packed with nerves and blood vessels. I call this the esium layer because the epimysium, the paramysium, and the endomysium are all present at this layer. You can see how all of these things occur. These deeper layers are basically structural to the body, and that's why they're less flexible. And then deeper than that, you have the visceral layers. And the visceral layers are even less flexible, and they suspend and embed internal organs. We're not going to talk a lot about the visceral layer in this presentation. We're going to focus more on the superficial and deep layers. So the myofascial sling system is looking at how all the muscles work together to transmit force through the body. This is based off the work by a gentleman by the name of Tom Myers of Anatomy Trains. He's done I can't even tell you how many dissections of human bodies. And what they did was they, instead of cutting a muscle here and a muscle there and then taking the muscle out, instead what they did was they wanted to see how the layers of muscle were all attached and how they transmitted force. So instead of cutting this way, they decided to turn the scalpel and go more horizontally and see how the body fit together in its layers. I often like to refer to the human body as a fluid-filled origami machine because of this. First, we're going to talk about the anterior and posterior superficial lines. They are absolutely vital to posture. They work together to allow you to stand, as well as do just about anything else. The dynamic tension on both sides holds you in balance. If one of these sides is dominant, it actually can cause pain and discomfort and range of motion issues in the opposing side. You want to kind of think about these two slings as like these two sails and the skeleton as this mast right in the middle. Westerners tend to be anterior dominant because we sit a lot, which causes posture and pain issues in the lower back, the hips, the neck, the shoulders, all over the body. Next, we're looking at the lateral lines. These lines run up and down the sides of your body and provide lateral or side-to-side support. They start at the lateral arch of the foot here and work their way all the way up. It runs up the side of the body, creating lateral stability for you all the way up and attaching at the skull, including going through your rib cage. It helps to mediate function in other lines, such as the front and back superficial lines, which we just talked about, the arm lines, which we'll talk about later, the spiral line, which is very important for walking, jogging, and running, and it also assists as a brake on rotational forces to protect the joints in the spine. Allows for abduction of the hip and side bending of the trunk. That means you can raise your leg out to the side like a side kick, or you can do a side crunch like you often see people doing in the gym. In cases of high hip or shoulder, it's unilaterally shortened on one side, and it can cause a myriad of issues, as you can see here, ranging from plantar fasciitis all the way up to stress, lack of focus, and lack of sleep. Even shoulder and neck problems can actually come from lateral line issues. Next, we're going to look at the spiral line. This line is a fascinating line, and it helps with rotational force. It aids in posture by creating support network that is double helix pattern supporting the entire body, and it actually starts at the skull, runs across the back, down around the front to the outside of the leg, all the way down to the foot, under the foot, then back up the rear side and back up and attaches to the spine. This means that your skull and your feet have a relationship through this sling. Often imbalances can be due to handedness, which, from like being right-handed or left-handed. Eye dominancy, which is an astigmatism, can cause that. Or leg dominancy, if you've ever had one leg that was dominant over the other, or if you've ever had a foot or knee injury, it can cause imbalances in this line. It's vital in gait and functional movements, and it helps support twisting, lateral, and rotational shifts. It also is really important in knee tracking. It interacts with most other lines, including the arm lines, and determines knee tracking, as I just said. Next, we're going to look at the functional lines, the front and back and side. So these lines are less involved in posture and more involved in day-to-day activity. They affect posture only if they're basically pulling a shoulder to the opposing hip in one form or another. So if you see a person that looks twisted, they may have an issue going on in the functional and spiral lines. These lines are highly active during sport function and always present in gait. These lines pull across the body contralaterally to increase power and accuracy in movement by extending the leverage of the arm across the whole body. So if I'm doing a throwing motion, the anterior line is active through the body in this contralateral or cross fashion linking this arm to the opposing groin, actually. And you can see how that's present in this stance. Same is also true for the lat speaking to the opposing glute, which you see in this. Next, we're going to talk about the arm lines. The arm lines have both superficial and deep layers. That means there are layers that are more on the surface and some that are closer to the bone. The arm lines also have front and back layers. Each layer provides support for the full function of the arm and shoulder. Due to repetitive use, these lines can become tight and entrap nerves and affect joint function. They can also entrap blood vessels. Lastly, we're going to talk about the deep front line. Now, in this case, I'm saving the best for last because the deep front line is called the deep front line because most of these things are inaccessible because they are absolutely vital in pulling yourself into the fetal position for protection. So bringing the knees in and bringing the knees in toward each other requires these muscles, and then pulling the knees up to the chest requires these muscles, and then pulling the head down requires these muscles, and then this also involves the diaphragm. So deepen the body on the front side of the spine, not on the back. It stabilizes the inner arch of the foot, provides stability to the legs at each segment, supports the lumbar from the front. That's with the hip flexors, meaning the iliopsoas connection supports the curvature of the spine from the front. It involves the shape of the abdominopelvic balloon, including the pelvic floor. So you can normally see this if you look at it from the side, but it's this pressure-based balloon in the abdomen that helps support the spine. It stabilizes the whole body while breathing. So as the diaphragm moves, all of these muscles are constantly kind of working with it to stabilize you and keep the balance between the head and the feet. So looking at that, we're looking at something I like to refer to as the hierarchy of movement. And this is what the most important components from an evolutionary perspective. If we look at evolutionary biomechanics, we're looking at what the body prioritizes, and the body prioritizes posture and core first. So posture plus core, what this means is the transverse abdominis engagement is absolutely vital. This is how you hold that abdominopelvic balloon tight so that way your spine is stabilized. This is a deep, deep core muscle that a lot of people have lost touch with. So early on, I work really hard with clients to make sure that they can activate this area. And that's part of core awareness, knowing where your core is and how it's oriented in space. We do this one part visually and one part proprioceptively. Next, the body prioritizes gait function. And this is because obviously from an evolutionary standpoint, this is how we are able to fight and flight and hunt and gather. We need our gait function in order to basically stay alive. So we want to look really clearly at the mechanics of gait function, the timing of gait function, and awareness of those components. Next, we would look at functional movements. So once this core is developed, then we can start to get into things like crawling, standing, walking, running, climbing, throwing, swimming, and fighting. I put this one in here, even if you have no interest in that, the body is designed to prioritize that function for your survival. Then above that is dynamic movement, meaning if we start combining two or more of these, that's functional, like taking functional movements and putting you in an environment where you need lots of them. A really good simple way of thinking about this would be a sport like parkour, or like if you've ever watched the TV show Ninja Warrior. Those are extremely dynamic movements. I would say on a more realistic level, playing with your children would be dynamic. Cleaning your house would be dynamic. Doing yard work would be dynamic. And then above that are things like compound movements. Squatting, hinging, pushing, pulling, twisting. This is what the fitness industry mostly focuses on as, in quotations, functional movement. But in reality, these are all analoguses for things that are actually happening up here. So how all this fits together is like this. So my view of this is, if posture is correct, all of these slings are in equal balance. And so when I first start working with clients that have dysfunction and pain, that's the first thing we look at is, are all of these slings in appropriate balance? And if they're not, how do we get them into balance? Then from there, we want to make sure that and this is, by the way, the superficial posterior, superficial anterior, and lateral lines. Then related directly to gait function, aka walking, jogging, running, is the spiral line. And then functional movement includes all of these and adds on the functional slings and the arm lines. And then dynamic movement is obviously constructed of all of this, as well as in compound movement. But you'll notice that I put breathing and basic organ function below this pyramid, because that is where the deep core line is really, really involved. This sling is, the simplest way of explaining it is, if there is dysfunction here, there is dysfunction here. And if there is dysfunction here, there is dysfunction here. And you have to interrupt those cycles and reprogram them so that things come into better balance. So let's talk about those cycles. And this is called the cumulative injury cycle. So the cumulative injury cycle is exactly that. It's a cycle that builds on itself. So first you wind up with tissue trauma. This can be an injury or impact, like a fall or a car accident. That will lead to inflammation. That inflammation then leads to muscle spasms. Those spasms get reinforced the longer they go on and become adhesions. Once they become adhesions, this alters the biomechanical patterns of the body. We call this altered neuromuscular control. Then from there, that creates muscular imbalances, and those muscular imbalances, whenever strained, create more tissue trauma. So now what happens as all that binds up is you wind up with entrapment of blood vessels, lymph system, and nerves. So there's a few different ways fascial impingement can affect function. At each layer, impingement can occur. So you see here, these are different layers. We talked about this earlier. The superficial layer, the deep layer, and then this even more visceral layer where the intermuscular septa is. Sticking of these layers can also affect function of muscles and the biomechanics due to glide being reduced. Now, glide is when these tissues run, or multiple muscles run over the top of each other. Sometimes they can get gummed down and stick to one another. They do this to provide stability and support, but it actually creates poor biomechanics and can put more strain on ligaments, tendons, joints, and bones. Nerve impingement can be very painful and can happen at any layer of this fascial system. You can see, imagine this is a nerve. Now, fascial nerve impingement can mimic bone impingement. So if you've ever gone to a chiropractor, they do these adjustments to separate and make space in joints and in the spine so that way the nerves aren't impinged. Well, what happens if the nerves are impinged in the soft tissue? How do you manage that? That can't be managed by fixing a subluxed bone or joint. That can only be managed by getting better glide into the fascial system. So functional impingements can often affect overall function of muscle, tendon, and ligament, like I mentioned, including, and this is the really important one, is when the biomechanics get altered, it creates like a grinding process, and that's where the inflammation comes from, or worse yet, the degeneration of cartilage or the degeneration of discs in the spine and things like that. It's like grinding your teeth, basically. The superficial layers can affect the deep layers and vice versa. And that's why I mentioned earlier, you can actually pull on the skin in an affected area, and you'll notice that it's tighter in that area than in other areas. So now I want to talk about how that affects something I like to refer to as the loci of movement. When you're born and you're a kid and you're well hydrated, you're capable of everything: running, walking, sprinting, throwing, climbing, crawling, labor, lifting, digging, raking, sports, play, and overall fitness. As we age, we get dehydrated, and as we age, we accumulate injuries. So as we accumulate these injuries and get dehydrated, we start to find ourselves going into the repetitive injury cycle. And part of the way that this works is it diminishes our loci of movement. So next what happens is I realize I'm kind of sore and achy. So now I don't sprint as much. I can jog and walk. I have reduced capacity for climbing and crawling, but swimming seems okay. Reduced capacity for overall labor. Sports and play and fitness suffer, and what most of us call this is, in quotations, aging, when in reality it's that our tissue quality is diminishing, partially because of wear and tear, which happens as we age. But it's not aging directly. Taking good care of your tissues can slow the aging process. So then this continues, this injury cycle continues, and now we're down to sitting, standing, walking. You can kind of underhand toss a ball, but you can't overhand throw it with a lot of power, no explosive movements. You can do labor, but it's limited, and you have to be really mindful of how you do it, and you have limited play. Then one day you wake up, you take one too many falls, you get in a car accident, you have a catastrophic failure of some kind, like a tendon breaking, and then all of a sudden, or a major back issue, you're in chronic pain. You're impaired, you're in pain all the time, you have reduced movement, reduced play, loss of quality of life. And that's not what anybody wants. So the way out of this chronic situation is to release the tissue, mobilize it, activate it, and reintegrate it, with the goal being to bring back and re-expand the loci of movement. So step one is release, using tool-based release or manual release techniques to hydrate and mobilize tissue. We're gonna bring all these tissues back online in a more effective way and get all the toxic, bad buildup in them out and pump in new good fluid and help them feel healthy and less inflamed and move and glide better with more elasticity, so that overall a sense of overall health and well-being returns. Using pressure to encourage the brain to remap the affected area also helps bring new neuromuscular reprogramming online so that your overall biomechanics improve. Through the kinesthetic experience, you grow your awareness of your body and the sensations you feel to have a better understanding of what your body is telling you. So you start to feel your body differently. When you're in pain, a lot of the time, all you can feel is pain. But as that pain reduces, you realize there's a whole myriad of sensations underneath that are actually feeding you important information. After that process, we start mobilizing tissues. In combination with the release techniques, you will follow up with a series of stretches and movements. Now, mobilizing those tissues, pumping that tissue, also hydrates the tissue and gets the toxins out. Using specific sling-based movements, the goal is to increase glide and elasticity in the tissues to help with hydration and shock absorption. So when I work with my clients online and I take them through their initial process, this is the key. These first two components are absolutely key in the first 8 weeks. Is really hydrating the tissue, mobilizing the tissue, and reducing the overall level of inflammation by increasing the hydration and nutrition brought to those tissues. This reduces impact on the joints as well as balances posture for overall better biomechanics. And then once those biomechanics are ready and online, we're going to activate the neurons. Activating the muscles and nervous system is key. This is called neuromuscular reprogramming. Once the tissue has been reoriented, the nervous system and muscles need to fire under these new conditions to cement the new pattern, this new neurological pattern. Skipping this step means that you'll never create a new pattern in the long run. You have to understand that fascia is constantly remodeling, and the nervous system is constantly updating. So those first two steps are transient. You'll feel better for a little while, but then they'll go away. The activation portion is absolutely vital to cementing these patterns in the long run, so you're not getting this grinding wear and tear. I live in Michigan, and we all make jokes about our cars constantly being destroyed by the roads and the weather. You have to kind of think about this from the perspective of, have you ever had the front end suspension of your car misaligned? It leads to undue wear and tear on the tires. It puts undue wear and tear on the bearings. It absolutely destroys the suspension. This is absolutely true when the body is out of balance as well. It creates undue wear and tear. So the next layer after we go through the activate portion is to integrate. This means integrating. So through the integration process, you're bringing all of these elements into balance. Posture, gait, and posture, gait, function, and dynamics come together in everyday activities. So this is a really great statue, and I love seeing how the lines are overlaid. They're all present in an athletic movement like a discus throw. Integration of all levels increases performance and expands the loci of movement, and it decreases risk of injury in the future. So a really big key in this process is what I call the 3 Ps, and that's patience, practice, and perception. Patience because, the body takes time to adapt. Biological systems, it's not like a part in a car. You can't just take a piece out and put a piece in. The system has to adapt over time. It's more similar to like growing a bonsai tree than it is to working on a vehicle. And then the second P is practice, because in order to produce those changes, there needs to be consistent and regular stimuli, and that comes from practice. And then the next P is perception. This is about being mindful during this practice and understanding not only where you are in space, like in relationship to other things, but understanding where you are in space in relationship to yourself. Where is my toe in regards to my knee? Where is my knee in regards to my hip? Where is my hip in regards to my shoulder and my head and my spine? Growing this sense of awareness is part of this perception practice. So you have to give yourself the time that you need. You have to be understanding, compassionate, and empathetic with yourself. You need to take the time and invest in yourself, in your health, and in your body through practice, and you need to do so in a mindful way. So that's really important moving forward. So how to realign and integrate the system. This is an example of one of the ways that I do postural assessments with my clients, particularly online. We take photos of the posture, we run it through this software, and then you get a chance to see how you progress over time. So the first big step is a postural assessment. We want to know where your posture's at and where it's going. We want to look at a lifestyle assessment. How are you living, and are there habits that you could take on that would help you manage your chronic pain and dysfunction better? And we want to do a gait assessment. We want to see how you move through the world. When you're in the gym, that's 1 hour a day, but you are standing, sitting, and walking through the world 24 hours a day. And if you've got chronic pain or discomfort or dysfunction, it's going to come out and be exacerbated in that significantly more than when you work out. So step 2 is, do you have 1 hour a day, 6 days a week to invest in your long-term health? You're not going to need this for the rest of your life, but it certainly wouldn't hurt if you did have it for the rest of your life. But to get you out of chronic pain and dysfunction, it takes an upfront investment. It's just like getting out of debt. 8 weeks of release, mobilize, and activate, focusing on the hierarchy of movement and prioritizing posture and gait initially, is absolutely required to start to structurally reintegrate and neuromuscularly reprogram and rehydrate and reorient the fascia. Weekly check-ins and assessments are absolutely key at this stage. And we want to look at every week your posture, your pain level, observations of your own function, and overall, how are you functioning in the greater world? And there's going to be feedback. Feedback from me to you, feedback from you to me. Step 3 is to reassess and either repeat that 8-week cycle again because your pain scale hasn't moved enough to get to the integration phase, or you move on to a 12-week integration phase, which has 3 levels. So there are 3 levels that go on from there. So you start at 8 weeks, and we'll talk more about this in a minute. In step 4, you want to increase the loci of movement through specific strength, balance, coordination, and control exercises. This is what goes on in those next 3 levels. So what is structural integration? Structural integration is taking disorganized biomechanics and organizing them. A process-based approach to somatic education that explores the possibility of change in how you use and experience your body. Through education, awareness, practice, therapeutic movement, you can release painful, stressful patterns of tension and learn to move and feel better. The way that we do this is through this structural integration process, which is soft tissue reconditioning in phase 1, really making sure that you understand posture, and really making sure that you understand core engagement. In phase 2, we start unilaterally repatterning, ipsilaterally repatterning, and contralaterally repatterning. What this means is we train each limb individually in its intended function. So the limb by itself, the limb with the whole side of the body, and the limb with the opposing side of the body. In phase 3, we start looking at throwing, crawling, running, dynamic movements. I listed them all before. These are just examples. And in phase 4, you go into a maintenance phase where you do release as needed, you do mobility as needed, and you do activation as needed. So in the soft tissue reconditioning phase, which can be anywhere from 8 to 24 weeks for most people, it is 80% self-myofascial work with 10% mobility and 10% activation work. We care mostly about getting the neurons on and firing through this pressure, and we want to rehydrate and recondition the tissues to get elasticity back into the tissue. Phase 2, we take that elasticity and that neurological heightened awareness, and we start with structural repatterning and reintegration. This can last anywhere from 12 to 36 weeks. This is a process where we basically do 30% soft tissue work, 30% mobility work, and 30% activation work, and a little bit of integration. In phase 3, we start making sure that you can move through 3-dimensional space with freedom. This is often a 12 to 36 week process where all of these things are divided up by quarter. So literally every session that you do, you're going to do some of this, some of this, some of this, and some of this. And then in phase 4, you go into a maintenance phase. So if you've done the math on what I'm saying that this process can last up to a year or more. But when it is done, your performance in whatever activity or sport you choose is going to be greatly enhanced, and your overall loci of movement should nearly have returned to the best, to whatever your mechanical capacities are. And this is an ongoing as needed or desired process. The thing is after experiencing all of this, you're going to have a very different relationship with your body, and you're going to know what you need when you need it and what works for you. The process is the process because your personal awareness is individualized. So what you can do today to start helping your chronic pain is you can stay hydrated. You may have heard me say the word hydrated a lot during this presentation. That is because hydration is absolutely key to good soft tissue and neurological function. All biological systems run on fluid. So being hydrated is absolutely important. It aids everything from nervous system function to myofascial health to digestion. Stop or limit alcohol intake. Alcohol is like gasoline on a dumpster fire if you have chronic inflammation in your system, and it also dehydrates you. So if you're a person that has chronic myofascial pain, if you drink the next day, you are going to be very uncomfortable. Stop or limit processed sugar intake. Also very, very bad for inflammation is processed sugar. I am not against carbohydrates. Carbohydrates are not bad. Processed sugar is bad. If you want to eat an apple, eat an apple. If you want to eat a banana, eat a banana. But don't eat high fructose corn syrup. They're very different things. Roll the bottom of your feet with a ball on a regular basis. This stimulates fluid flow, and it also helps with proprioception globally, meaning that your entire body balances better if you roll your feet 2 to 3 minutes a day. It has also been shown to reduce back pain. Roll your glutes on a regular basis. The human gluteal system is absolutely vital for posture and function, and they may be some of the most important postural muscles in your body, so it's really easy to do. You just take a ball and you can either roll your glute on the wall with the ball or on the ground. And then roll your back with a foam roller on a regular basis. This helps hydrate the tissues around the spine, and it can even help hydrate the discs in the spine, as long as this isn't going to cause you pain or injury. The key to understanding this is that there are less nerve endings on the back than there are on the front. So regularly putting pressure on them helps with proprioception, just like with the feet and glutes. Use heat to reduce tension in the body. You can do this through sauna or like a bath. This also helps hydrate tissue by increasing blood flow. You can also use ice to reduce inflammation. So if you have chronic inflammation in a joint, ice can be very helpful in lowering the inflammation. So you can alternate between hot and cold. Go for regular walks when you can. Movement also hydrates tissue. Move on a regular basis about every hour. One of the simplest behaviors and habits that you can develop is setting a timer that every hour you get up from your desk and go drink 6 to 8 ounces of water. Instead of filling a big jug and just sitting there with poor posture and chugging down water, instead, make sure you get up. Take the 5 minutes to get up every hour and go drink a little bit of water. 1, you're going to be hydrating your tissues through movement. 2, you're actually going to absorb that water because you're not guzzling huge amounts of it at one time. And 3, it's a good habit to get into for helping your body change position on a regular basis so you don't wind up with chronic tension from always being in the same poor position. So where to go from here? Some of the stuff that I just gave you is useful right out of the box. But the next step that I normally do with clients is I take them through a process. So typically we start with an 8-week program. And in that 8-week program, what I do is I get on the phone with you, we talk a little bit. And if you decide that this is a good fit and we decide that this is a good way forward, we want to make sure that we get you all of your equipment delivered to your home as quickly as possible. We do an initial postural assessment, which can be done online, and I can show you how to do that. Coaching to develop positive habits is a big piece of what I do because as you learn from this training, there's more to it than just doing exercises. There's lifestyle components that need to be managed. Weekly check-ins and monitoring multiple aspects of your progress, things like how's your pain? Do you feel like you're able to move freer? Sometimes it's not a straight line to recovery, and so sometimes the pain goes up, sometimes the pain goes down, sometimes you feel looser, sometimes you feel stiffer, sometimes you feel more stable, sometimes you feel less stable, but it's all about monitoring that. And with my experience and the number of people that I've worked with, having me monitor that really shortens the road to progress, and it also makes it possible for me to actually explain to you what you might be experiencing and why, given the whole track record of your progress. So we also do regular meetings for support. So one of the things that is included in these 8-week programs is connecting you with a community of people that are going through the same process that you are. One of the benefits of this is just knowing that you're not alone. Being in chronic pain can be so isolating. So hearing other people's stories, hearing other people's questions, it's something that is really, really helpful, and it also helps build community. And they do say that community, so being lonely or feeling disconnected is actually more devastating to your health than obesity and smoking. So lately there's been a lot of research done on this. So feeling connected to a community of people that are going through similar things can be really healing in and of itself. We do online support for any questions through the app that we utilize. Anytime you have a question, you can just shoot it into the messenger, and either myself or one of my associates will get back to you, if not immediately within the next 24 hours. Daily follow-along exercises will be delivered to you through the app with very clear explanations and demonstrations, so that way you will know exactly what you're doing. And again, if you have any questions, you just shoot us a message. In this 8-week process, you'll get more than 75 instructional videos. And of those instructional videos, there's well over 2 hours worth of material. So weekly postural assessments and follow-up are also a big part of this. So there is a process that you follow, and through these postural assessments and this regular checking in and monitoring these different points, this gives us the ability to then make sure that you are getting things that are uniquely tailored to you as an individual for your personal needs. Just depending on how you're progressing, because a lot of these issues come in layers and they get resolved in layers. And when we get one layer to kind of peel away, you find that there's these other unresolved issues under the next layer. And this is why it doesn't feel like a linear process. Sometimes it feels like 2 steps forward, 1 step back. The key is that there is consistent forward progress. And at the end of the 8 weeks, we do a full assessment and we do a planning session. We say, hey, do you want to continue at this level, or do you feel like you're ready to move on to increasing the loci of movement even further and getting into some more activation and integration exercises? So the key to this, if you want to do this, is you want to schedule a call with me. The thing is it really comes down to the fact that in my life and in the relationships that I've had, I want to learn about your story. I want to know more about what you've been through and what you experience, so that 1, we can figure out if this is a good match, and 2, because it's really become my passion in life to help people through this and to help people understand the process and to give them the tools that they need to be able to resolve these issues and manage these issues for themselves lifelong. It may feel like a long process initially in the beginning, but you will learn skills and tools that you will be able to utilize for the rest of your life. And the hope and the goal is to make sure that that leads to a more active and happier lifestyle, just in general. And then, like I said, in that call, we'll discuss your personal journey and your goals. And I want to know, what is your journey? What are your goals? I had one of the best clients I met, we had a really great initial meeting. She came in and she said, no, my goal is I want to be able to lift my son. That's so not, that's not something you often hear in the normal fitness space conversation. I want to be able to go on a hike. I had a client that came to me, they had recently had an ankle replacement, and they wanted to go on a hike in Italy with their husband. And we prepared them for that. That's the kind of thing that I feel really passionate about, is helping people live the life they want to live, and not allowing something that they can't change to be in full control of their life. You can't change whether or not you're in chronic pain, but you can change your behaviors and how you manage it and what you do about it, and that can ultimately change your life. Hey, thank you for staying through the whole training. If you would like to set up that call, please just do so by clicking on the link below and following the prompts. You'll get all set up. Make sure that when you set up the call, you give yourself, I'd say 30 minutes to an hour for the phone call, because I'd really like to hear your story. I want to know what your goals are, and I want to see if this is going to be a good fit for us. So go ahead and click the link, set up the time to call, make sure it's a time that you can take the call and you're not going to be interrupted, because it's an important conversation, and we can see where we go from there.
Thank you again for staying through the whole training, and I hope this has been helpful.